Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of A Mic on the Podium with me, Michael Seal. Today, I conduct a conversation with a Canadian conductor who first came to prominence in 1984 when he founded his own orchestra, and he's since gone on to have a highly successful career both symphonically and in the opera house. Since 2018, he has been principal conductor of the Orchestra of St. Luke's in New York. It is a great pleasure to welcome Bernard Labadie. Bernard, it's lovely to meet you for the first time and to chat with you. How are you today?
I'm fine, thank you very much.
Good, and where are you? I know there's a time difference between us. Where are you at the moment?
I'm at home in Quebec City, Canada. And so it's 10:05 in the morning. I got just enough caffeine going on in my body to be efficient.
It's often the way with this podcast, and I speak to people who live in North America, that it's sort of mid to late afternoon here. It's breakfast time for you, and occasionally I've done it the other way around, where it's been morning here and they've been in Australia with a glass of wine in their hand, and I've been very
Nightcap,
jealous.
yeah, nightcap talks.
Well, Quebec's going to come up a lot, at least at the beginning of your life. I always go straight back to the beginning, and I know that you're from Quebec. It is your hometown. Musical parents, musical family at all? And what were your first instruments? Because I've looked on the internet and I can't find any mention of instruments at all.
Yeah, well, because some people might say it's not really an instrument. I would say I was an ordinary recorder player.
Yeah.
Turned really bad singer, who eventually understood that he was better making other people sing and play than actually doing it himself. I do not come from a musical family at all, actually. My dad would put on LPs of what we would call light classical music, like Rossini overtures, waltzes, and things like that, occasionally on Sunday afternoons. He would also occasionally listen to a Met broadcast on Saturday afternoon if it was Carmen or Traviata or an opera that he knew. But that was about it. There was no piano in the house, which to this day I regret, because I wish I had at least learned some keyboard to would have come in handy in my future life. But that didn't happen. And no, the seminal figure in my musical epiphany, was a third grade music teacher who noticed that I had a good ear and that maybe I should do something with it.
And it sounds like conducting was something that you wanted to do from a very early age. I mean, as you can imagine, over 120 episodes into this podcast, I've spoken to 120 different conductors, and sometimes it comes in very late indeed. I mean, their 30s and 40s, and others, like you, I mean, the story everybody knows about Andris Nelson's was he wanted to become a conductor at the age of 5 when he heard Tannhäuser for the first time. So was it something that really came to you early in life?
It's hard to say. I definitely didn't think of myself as a conductor before I accidentally had to do it.
Right.
This being said, I had always been a kind of a leader of some sort in different musical groups. I had a big mouth. It was clear that I wanted to be in charge of things. I think that was part of my nature. So in that, I could say that the conductor, initial flash of life was probably there from the very beginning. But the actual decision to become a conductor came when I was 19.
Yeah.
After I got to conduct a group of friends, colleagues at Laval University in Quebec City. Long story short, we were supposed to do kind of a joint adventure of doing Perils, Dido, and Aeneas with a colleague who was from the conservatory, and he eventually pulled out, and I ended up having to do the whole thing myself. And I conducted my first concert, which was a concert version of Dido and Aeneas, when I was 19. And after I did that, I never turned back. After I did that, I knew this is what I wanted to do. But I would say so that that transformation from really mediocre singer to becoming a conductor happened about when I was 18, I would say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we spend our lives answering emails or phone calls from our agents about jump-ins, and it sounds like, it all started for you with a jump-in. I mean, was the fellow student who pulled out, I mean, I'm assuming he was studying conducting, and were you watching him and thinking, well, taking things in, or, had you got some ability already, or you just stood up there and went, oh, well, I'll have to do it, so I'll have to do it?
That colleague of mine was actually a harpsichordist, and it had not been clear whether who would be actually moving his hands in front of the group. So it was kind of designed in advance, I assume, for me to end up doing it. But what was great is that at Laval University, there was no conducting class. There was no way really to get a proper training in that. But there was a lot of freedom to come up with projects that would be supported by the community and by the university. And that's how I got to meet one of my very best friends, Antoine Bouchard, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, eminent organist, who, because we needed a teacher to kind of oversee what we were doing. So I knocked at his door for the first time, and I remember the first time I came into his office, I came out like 3 hours later because we talked about music nonstop. So Laval University was a great place for me to explore and try things. And actually, after that first experience with Dido, the year after, I was offered to conduct Monteverdi's L'Incoronazione di Poppea with the opera studio there. So I was 21, conducting colleagues of my age or older, which was a bit odd. And I'll never forget when I was offered this, because I was so excited. I said, yes, of course I'll do it. And I had no idea what the opera was about. And I rushed to the library, opened the score, and saw that it was basically 3 hours of recits and arioso-like music for singers and continuo. I said, oh my God, what have I done?
Well, any conducting student would be laughing now, as well I'm laughing and you're laughing. But for those who don't conduct, and I know there are quite a lot of people who listen to this podcast who don't actually conduct, recits or recitatives are notoriously difficult to conduct, and they're on most of the big high-hitting competitions, aren't they? Some sort of Mozart aria with a recitative. I mean,
usually the quintessential piece on any audition piece for a conductor who has to be involved in opera would be the speaker scene in Magic Flute, which is Mozart's longest accompanied recitative, and which is notoriously difficult to conduct. Yep.
I've sort of mentioned it occasionally in the past that Sakari Oromo, who was my first big name teacher, I suppose, talked to me about muscle memory for contemporary music when you're doing things of 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3, conducting along in your study and working out muscle memory. Recits are very similar, but you're dealing with the animal that is the singer, and having
exactly.
That's the difficult thing. Yeah,
I mean, you have to. It takes two to tango.
It does.
I mean, you are in charge of the orchestra in front of you, but you have to react to the singer. And in an ideal world, the singer always does it in the exact way you expect him or her to do, but it rarely happens on the opera stage. So it's something that I love about opera. It's the unpredictability of it, and the fact that you have to be ready to react at any time. And I certainly had a few moments in my opera career, which is basically over now. I do very little opera, but I did a lot in my early years, and you learn a lot in that trial by fire, being at pit and having to react to what's happening. I mean, the first official opera job that I had was quite something, quite a privilege. I was offered, when I was 31, I was offered the job of not only music but artistic director of Quebec City Opera, my hometown, for all sorts of reasons that were not all musical. Anyways, they gave the job to me, who didn't know much about conducting opera, certainly not much about the real business of opera, dealing with a professional theater and all of that. And I literally had to learn on the spot. And the second production I had to conduct was Verdi's Nabucco, that had been planned by my previous, the person who had founded the opera, the one I was succeeded. And we had this stalwart of the Metropolitan Opera, Theodore Lambrinos. He passed away, unfortunately, last year or 2 years ago. And Ted had covered the role of Nabucco a zillion times for the Metropolitan Opera. He knew the piece in and out. So he was, I mean, when we were rehearsing, I could always count on him. He knew the piece. I could always focus on the others. And in the opening night, there are two very similar passages at the end of, if I'm right, Act 2 and Act 4. It's been a while, or Act 2 and 3, whatever, that are very, very similar, like big end fermata, chorus and soloist, people applaud, and then the Nabucco starts a recit by himself, and then the orchestra comes in. And the second time it happened, he went back to the first recit. So he started the wrong music, of course, in a different key. And all I could was to bring in the orchestra with what I had in front of me on the page.
Yeah.
And then he realized that he was at the wrong place, and he completely froze. And there was nothing coming out of his mouth. And all I had was, like 6 or 7 bars of rest. and
then bum.
So exactly. Yeah. So there's a little voice that just was heard in the hall, something like it was me singing Nabucco part in the pit. So I mean, for a guy who had been doing mostly Baroque music, because that was my first love, and it still is to a large extent, that was quite a shock. So it's trial by fire, and then you learn that anything can happen in an opera pit. And these are actually extremely valuable experiences, because once you've survived things like that, you can survive a lot of things.
Well, I'm going to move away from the opera pit briefly and tell 2 little stories of my own, which it's in the netherworld for us conductors, because of course we never speak in performances. We just don't. And you had to sing that line from Nabucco to try and wrestle the production back that evening. I had 2 instances. One was at a conservatoire. Well, I was actually conducting the BBC Scottish Symphony Orchestra at the time, but it was conservatoire students playing concertos. And we were doing the Nielsen Clarinet Concerto. And I think the soloist was so amazed he was stood on the stage with the BBC Scottish and me conducting, he completely forgot to come in one of his entrances in the Nielsen Clarinet Concerto. So I just gently started whistling it next to him to remind him of what the clarinet part was like. And he came flying in. But the other one, so whistling is sort of okay. But then the other one was the Shostakovich first cello concerto with a dear friend of mine. There's a passage in the finale which is a waltz which goes bum 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 bim bim bum 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 bum, and the orchestra comes in every 5 bars, and then the clarinets go across the top. Well, it's a 5-bar phrase for the solo cello, then a 6-bar, then a 7-bar, and then an 8-bar, or something like this. He played the 5-bar phrase, and then he went straight to the 8-bar phrase.
These things happen.
Yeah, and as he got to the top, or halfway through it, he realized he was in the wrong place and done the wrong thing, and so he just rested on a top note and went dee 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 over and over again, and looked at me as if to say, "What are you going to do?" And one of the clarinets came in, and I realized there was no way out of this. So I saw there was a tutti coming up where he didn't play, and so I just had to shout. I don't know what the rehearsal number was, but I had to shout in the concert, "Figure 48," and it's bang, and then we jumped there. And of course I spoke, and that's the cardinal sin. You don't shout out. And I asked Zachary Ormo, who was teaching me at the time, what I should have done, and he listened to my tell the story I've just told you, and he said, "Mike, I can't see any other way of getting out of that.
No, there's no other way.
I think you had to speak." But yeah, it makes your blood run cold, doesn't it? It just makes
Once in Tosca, with the same company a few years later, I remember that was the last performance, and of course in Act 1, just before the Angelus, you have bells, and then the sacristan just sings a little prayer. And for the 4th performance, the percussion player from the orchestra was sick, and he was replaced by a student with very little experience. And as we were getting nearer that part of the music, I was looking at the percussion section. Is the guy aware that it's coming? Is somebody helping him? And nobody was moving. He wasn't moving. We were like a few bars away. He was not, ready to it. And when we got there, I just went dong, 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 followed by a big swear.
Yeah, I can well imagine. Oh, brilliant.
Exactly. So moments like that. That's I think every conductor who's done some opera in his or her life has stories of that nature.
In 1984, you founded, I never know whether that's the right word, formed a group which you
all
of those words, called Le Violon de Bois, which is a historically informed performance group, really, isn't it? I mean, was that something that you'd studied a lot about, or how did you end up forming a group like that fresh out of university? I mean, you graduated in 1983 and you founded that group in 1984. How did it come about?
Actually, I founded two groups officially 1 year after
course,
the other.
There's also the choir as well.
The choir, La Chapelle de Québec. But the irony is that in actuality, the orchestra was founded to accompany the choir.
Right.
The choir existed beforehand, and it was that group of singers that I was conducting at the university, with which I had done Perils, Dido, and Aeneas. And the year after, we did Handel's L'Allegro, Il Penseroso, and Il Moderato. And unfortunately, the level of string playing, or the sheer number of string players at the university was there was no critical mass to form an orchestra, although we had lots of great singers. So basically, I founded an orchestra in order to accompany that choir at the university. And after I graduated, I had to take the choir out of the university structure. And that's when I had to officially found the choir. That's why when you look at at years, it looks like the orchestra was founded before the choir. But in actuality, it's the other way around. And it's very important. It's a very important thing because my absolute first love in life is 18th and early 19th century repertoire for choir and orchestra. This is what triggered my love for music. I know exactly when I decided I wanted to be a musician. It was in December 1974, so I was 11, and I went to a concert presented by Quebec Symphony Orchestra, a Christmas concert, and the concert opened with the first cantata from Bach's Christmas Oratorio. And that opening with the solo timpani, and then the woodwinds responding, and then the cascades of scales going down, and the joyful noise that it all produced, it swept me away. I was literally struck by lightning, and it's the only thing I could talk about in the days after that concert. And of course, I met regularly with my elementary music teacher back then, and that's when really after that concert I wanted to hear everything by Bach, and especially choral music. And a year later, that teacher suggested, "Oh, you should try the B minor mass." I mean, saying that to a 12-year-old kid. So, and I was a paper boy, so I used my paper boy's money to buy a pocket score, the famous Eulenburg scores that conductors all know, with the yellow cover, the cheapest scores. And they're
right behind me, as you can see. There's a whole row of them.
Exactly. And I asked my mom for Christmas. I wanted a recording of the B minor mass, and it was a awkward and in retrospect funny moment when she brought me to a classical music store, record store. Because it was LPs back then. And we were greeted by the classical music specialist, an older old gentleman,
Yes.
who was, full of his knowledge and everything. And my mom said to him, "Well, my son here wants to buy, what is it that you want to buy?" I said, "I want Mass in B minor." And he went straight to the cheapest version available, probably saying, "Well, for a 12-year-old kid, that's going to be enough." And
Right.
I think it was a reprint of a version with Cayenne and the Berlin Phil. And I said, "No, I want the version with Nikolaus Anoku on period instruments." My
Yeah.
mom was looking at me like I spawned the devil.
I bet.
And
Yeah. Who is this
I
child? Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I never forgot the guy's answer, because if you remember, back in the time of LPs, Mass in B minor was always a 3 LP set. And when Hanoku made his first recording, of course, his tempi were overall quicker than everything that had been heard before. So it was a 3 LP set, but the flip side of the third LP was blank. And the guy told my mom, "Ma'am, you're about to buy 3 LPs, but there's only 2 LPs and a half of music on that. You've got to, it's not a good deal." And
well,
I did get the Hanoko version, and
yeah.
the rest is history. The thing is that little score, which is one of the first ones I bought, that pocket score, every time I do the B minor Mass, I take it out of my library and I put it on my music stand. I don't use it anymore, of course. I'm using a much more reliable edition, but I keep it there almost as a talisman, as something that just reminds me of it connects me with my whole journey as a musician, because this was really and it's, when I open it, first of all, it's been read so often, it's been often opened so often, probably my whole mother's recipe book, you have spots and stains of everything she cooked in that and you can see my kids' handwriting, Bernard Labadie, 1975, and it's I'm sort of moved a little bit every time I open it, because it just brings me to these early years when I fell in love with that music. I was completely, totally absorbed in
I mean,
it.
they are such personal
took over
things.
my whole life.
Yeah, they are such personal things, scores. I mean, they really are. I mean, I don't think I could throw any of them out that I've ever used, that I can replace them with others, but the originals won't be thrown away. I mean, it's good to look back at them. Sticking with HIP and with, your love of that genre of music, there are 3 names that appear on your Wikipedia page as being sort of mentors or teachers or people that you went and sought advice from: Simon Streatfeild, Pierre de Vaux, and the very famous John Eliot Gardner. What did you take from them? I mean, obviously John Eliot Gardner's in the HIP field as well, and has done a lot of, hasn't he recorded all of the Bach cantatas? And then some. And then everything else as well. How did they help you form your, opinions and things? What were they like, those 3 people?
Well, first of all, I didn't write that Wikipedia page.
No, none of us ever do. Yeah.
Why did that person pick these 3 names?
I'm sure there are many more.
Especially, there are many more. And I mean, in the case of John Eliot, I studied with him for 5 days, so I think it's to put his name there as one of my teachers is a bit overblown, but he was a very important figure in my life. But before him, Simon Streatfeild, very esteemed violist, working with Neville Marriner in the early years of the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields. Simon moved to Canada, became a conductor, moved to Canada, and conducted every Canadian orchestra for years. And he ended up music director of the Quebec Symphony in my hometown. And exactly when I was doing those early projects, like the Purcell Monteverdi, that's when he was appointed. And I went to him because I needed a teacher, a mentor or something. And Simon was this immensely generous, humble in the best sense of the word, musician and person. And I couldn't say that he really taught me, because we didn't really have classes or anything. Sometimes we would talk about scores and things like that. But he opened doors for me. Like he helped get me a scholarship, which allowed me to follow the Quebec Symphony for a year as an apprentice conductor. That's probably the lowest title one can get, but still, it allowed me to conduct a Haydn symphony at the end of the season. But I learned a lot just watching him and basically following an orchestra for a year, having an idea what the life of a symphony orchestra is. And later on, Simon hired me as his choir conductor for the orchestra. So these were very important moves. Pierre Dervaux is also linked actually to the history of the Quebec Symphony, but way before my days. He was actually one of the great French conductors of the 20th century. Very, very strong personality. He was music director in Quebec City for 2 years, and some older musicians who played under him still have a long list of jokes and quotes by Pierre Dervaux because he was quite the talker. He was a specialist in French music, and he was also his technique was absolutely stellar and extremely simple and clear, because he was the official fireman for all concerts in France. If a conductor fell ill and there was no rehearsal left or only the dress, one would call Pierre Dervaux because he could always save the day, conducting everything from memory. And when I got to work with him, actually, he was teaching in a summer music academy near Quebec City called the Domaine Forget. And I studied with him 2 summers in a row. And this is where this is when I really understood what conducting an orchestra is all about, technically speaking, because his teaching was so simple, because he was this fireman of a conductor. His technique had to be absolutely idiot-proof. What I mean is that it had to be clear, like with one gesture, only one thing could happen, because he was under so many circumstances when he couldn't even explain a single thing, because he would just jump in the pit and conduct the thing. Technically, I think I did learn all the basics of my technique with him, because he was so helpful in that. And as for John Elliott, as I told you, I worked only with him for a week in a summer academy that was in Stuttgart in '91, the Bach Academy, run by Helmut Rilling. And John Elliott was there with his orchestra, and so we had daily sessions with his orchestra, a certain number of conductors, and he also conducted concerts before and after the festival. So, and he had been my hero for years. So for me to finally get to work with him was a very important moment, and he helped me in ways that were completely that was almost incomprehensible for me at the beginning, because John Elliott as a teacher has the keenest eye that I've ever seen from a conductor. He can look at a conductor, for like 30 seconds, and he knows exactly what piece from the rep that is available to assign to that conductor in order to clean up problems or solve anyways. And with me, what happened is that he understood very early on that my greatest anguish in life was not to be prepared enough. And I had prepared like so deeply for the whole program of that, but there was one piece, actually a few pieces from one work, which I could not prepare because I never got the copy. On the program, there were excerpts from that very little known opera comique by Gluck called Les Pèlerins de la Mecque, which is basically the same story as Mozart's Abduction.
Right.
And that's why the 2 pieces were on the same program, because they wanted to, underline connections between the 2 of them. And there was only one edition. It was Bernard. It was out of print. So back then they had secured, there was no IMSLP, back
No,
then you
no,
couldn't
no.
go to. So the festival had secured authorized photocopies of the score from Bernard, but they shipped it to the wrong address, so I never got it.
Oh,
So when I got there, I went to him directly and I said, "You have to know that I never got this music, and what should I do?" He said, "Oh, don't worry, don't worry. I want people to conduct music that they have, fully prepared. So I'll just give that to other people. Don't worry." Thank God I did manage to get a copy of that, nevertheless, and studied it, because he after the first day, when he asked me to conduct the first quintet from Magic Flute, and it went well. I was so happy. I was on cloud nine, because, hey, I was working with my hero and everything was fine. And from the second day on, he made me basically sight read in front of the orchestra, including a very tricky sextet from that piece, which is very short, but it's super quick. And then, 6 different singers who were all students of very, very different levels.
yeah.
And most of them couldn't speak French, and the piece is in French. So it was a complete mess, and he chose to give it to me. And he knew I didn't know the piece. And when he did that, I just told him, "Mr. Gardner, I don't know the piece." He says, "Oh, you will like it." And so the whole week was like that. At the end, on the final day, he threw me with just a few hours of preparation in the great quintet at the end of great quartet. I'm sorry, at the end of Act 2 of Abduction, which I had to conduct, and half of it I had rehearsed. So for me, it was like hell.
Yeah.
And I hated him because I had, prepared so well, and he was making me do stuff that I hadn't prepared. But that proved to be so helpful in the future, because in the conductor's life, even if you want to be always super well prepared, it's not always the case. Sometimes you have to jump in at the last minute. You have to learn a lot of music at the last minute, or for any reason. I mean, you do not always show up as prepared as you would like to. And he basically gave me, I wouldn't say a shield of invincibility, but definitely I would say a true inner confidence that when placed in a situation like that, I could manage, and I could survive.
Yeah.
And actually, the year after, because we corresponded for a while in the years after, and 1 year later, I had to conduct a concert in Belgium with a chamber orchestra. I showed up there, and I looked at the music on the musician stand, and it was not the symphony that was in my contract. So I showed my contract to the guy. I said, this stuff. "Oh, you're right. Oh, it's a mistake. We can't do that one because we did it last week." So instead of panicking, I just said, "Okay, can we start with the concerto?" And I had 60 minutes for lunch. I just had my sandwich, turning pages, looking at the piece, and then we were fine in the afternoon. And I wrote him a little thank you note saying, you have instilled me with something that cannot be learned in books or anything.
It's a big lesson we need to learn, isn't it? I mean, I'm just sitting here. To my right is a desk which is all of the programs laid out for the next 6 months. And there are some programs on there that are all music I've done before, or their scores I started marking up 9 months ago. But there's a gap. And the gap is, I go to Trondheim tomorrow and do a concert, which is all ready to go. I come home, I have 2 weeks off, and then I go to Cologne for 2 weeks' work with the WDR Funkhaus Orchestra. I've got one of the 9 scores here because I happen to have conducted it before. The others haven't arrived yet. See, the whole point about our life as a conductor is you could be looking at scores that are old friends of yours in 12 months' time, or have 12 months to mark something up. Or you could, as you've just explained, do a symphony over lunch, or the scores just don't arrive to you because it's new music and it hasn't been finished yet until a week before the concert. And we have to try and build this all into our psyche and our way of coping, don't we? That's the whole point of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I have to say that by choice, I have over the years narrowed my repertoire a lot. And now I really focus on 18th century and early 19th century. So I'm not anymore in the position of receiving a score on which the ink is not dry yet. It never happens to me. I don't do that stuff anymore. That's by choice. But I had to, in my early years, to go through those trials, and they are I think they are an integral part of a conductor's education, definitely.
You said earlier that you, at the beginning of your career, obviously with I can't resist telling you this because you probably know anyway, but in the UK your band is called Roy's Violins.
Of course, I know.
Yeah, of course, I'm
It's
sure you
been
know
called
that.
the Roy's Violins for years.
Yeah,
I know that.
but
And look,
yeah,
seriously,
yeah.
in Penn State University, our very, very first concert ever in the United States, I believe it was in 1997, something like that, when we just started touring. We do that concert, and after the concert, there's a guy who just arrives, rushes into it was in the church, so the sacristy or something, and he was there. Just, wow, wonderful, fabulous concert. Where is Roy? And it was not a joke. It was
No,
serious.
no.
He really thought it was Roy's violins, and I
Yeah.
was Roy. So.
Brilliant. Oh, I love that. No, where was I? Oh, yes. You started with your group, but also you said earlier on I suppose the first half, maybe longer, of your career was based a lot in opera. I mean, you were also doing the choral director of the Orchestre Symphonique de Quebec, but then, as you said, artistic director of Opera de Quebec, and also later Opera de Montreal. But you just said, or you said earlier on, that opera is now something that you do less and less and less of. Is that a conscious decision, much as you decided to concentrate solely on the stuff that you're most famous for, or has it just happened that you've done less and less opera? How's it come about to
No,
be that way?
it was a very conscious decision. As you said, after Quebec Opera, I was appointed to Montreal Opera. I was there for only 4 years because it was not a happy tenure. I will not get into details here, but for all sorts of reasons, most of them being non-musical, it was not a happy time in my life. And
it's what this podcast is about: is being open and honest.
of course. Oh, absolutely,
Jack
totally.
Van Stein said he hated being the GMD at Weimar because of, the bureaucracy. Nothing to do with music making, but it's good to hear that not every occasionally not everything is a rosy road.
No, absolutely not. And actually, I had signed a first 3-year contract, which was successful, although there were many issues, things that needed to be fixed. And I accepted to sign a second contract, which was a 5-year contract. And after 1 year, I begged them to free me from that contract. And I didn't have to beg, actually, because they didn't have enough money to pay me. So so that was part of the money was one of the many problems there. So, and after that, that led to a moment of reckoning, a moment when I had to just look at myself in the mirror and say, okay, what makes you happy? What do you do really well? And I figured, because I was doing opera in Montreal like 4 months a year, but I still had Les Violons de Roy. I was still music director with like a 12-13 week season, including touring, and already had a busy calendar as a guest. So I was running after my tail, literally. I was jumping from one plane to the other and doing the story thing, the jet set things that people think should be a conductor's life. And I realized that, first of all, I wasn't happy. And second, I had to be honest with myself, is that I was not great at everything I was doing. And I was, I believe, a competent opera director in later repertoire and romantic repertoire, because I did all of the Puccini, the Verdi, all of that stuff I had to do for that. And I love the music. It's not about the music. But I just realized that I didn't think I had a voice that was worth, I didn't say it wasn't worth to be heard, but it's my voice in that music was not at the level of what I could achieve in my repertoire of choice. And I didn't feel comfortable having kind of a dual life. What I mean by that is that in the field of Baroque music and early romantic music, with Les Violons and my work as a guest, I was at a a certain level, professionally speaking, and I felt that artistically what I was doing in the opera world was at a lower level. And that was related to me. It was not necessarily my career or opportunities or anything. It was related to what I could do. I was not a great Massenet conductor. I was not a great Puccini. I was a competent Puccini conductor, but I was not a great one. And I didn't see the point of keeping in the limelight another merely competent conductor in the field of opera. There are so many charlatans everywhere doing our work. And I felt that eventually I might become one of them in that repertoire. And I had colleagues, I have, colleagues from Quebec who I know are a million times better than I am doing that stuff. And it was better for me to just focus on what I could really do. Because I mean, and you know that, Michael, there are no conductors who are absolutely excellent at everything they do.
Absolutely, yeah. Absolutely.
If I mean, talking about symphony orchestra conductors who do everything from, from Purcell to the thing that was composed the day before, it's impossible. It just doesn't exist. And some of us are much more flexible and have a much wider array of things that they excel in. Some others, like myself, I think, can really achieve something, but in a smaller field. And for me, what matters is not how wild the field is; it's about how well it is cultivated.
Absolutely, that's a brilliant phrase. Yeah,
yeah, and for me, I just can't look at myself in the mirror if I don't consider that I really have something personal to say about a score. And it's not a reflection on the value of the music itself. There's nothing I find more exciting than being seated in a great concert hall and listening to a great symphony orchestra performing The Rite of Spring. This is a seismic experience, which I absolutely love. But I don't have something to say as a performer about that score. I don't have anything to say that I believe would add anything to what other people have done before. So my repertoire has shrunk and now literally is focused on 18th century music. I would say mid to late Baroque, going up to late classical, early romantic. I'm getting there slowly. I'm doing more and more bits of romantic music, but for me, it's very important that I approach it from behind. That is, I approach it from the earlier music. And so when I do Schubert or Mendelssohn, I'm interested a lot in what these composers have borrowed from earlier music, and how music evolved, and then they opened doors to new worlds. But for me, it's very important to do it which is a very hip thing, to approach it from behind, rather than start from the traditions, the so-called traditions that have been associated. I'm working right now, for instance, on Schubert 9, which I will be doing in February with Orchestra of St. Luke's, which is my orchestra in New York. I'm sure we'll get there in that talk, I'm sure. And I'm always amazed when I look at that piece, because the tempo connection between the introduction and the quick section of the first movement, the Allegro, is so obvious. It's the same tempo, and that's how these people were. And in the Romantic tradition, the intro is much slower, and then you have to do this long accelerando in like the last 20 bars to get eventually to the tempo. And everybody say, "Oh, that transition is so difficult," and of course it's so difficult because it's completely unnatural.
If you're starting from the back of the pack
exactly,
it's a massive accelerando.
Exactly, and it doesn't make any musical sense. It's completely absurd, but for all sorts of reasons, this is how people got to do that piece. And so that's the kind of stuff that I'm trying to get rid of when I look at the music. So I'm getting slowly into Schubert. I'll do Brahms Requiem 2 seasons from now. I've done it when I was a much younger conductor, but it's a piece that I absolutely love because if you come from the world of Bach and Handel and Schütz, then you find your home in Brahms Requiem. This is where, because it's so clear, the connection is so clear. So for me, I have to understand and feel that connection in order to feel that I have something to bring to the table that is mine, that is my own voice. Otherwise, I'm useless.
Well, you just mentioned music director of Orchestra of St. Luke's since 2018, and talking about, you're shrinking the repertoire, but it sounds like you're revisiting old pieces, or you're pushing the boundaries up to Schubert and whatever else. Does that mean that you're looking for guest conductors to come in and fill in the gaps, and so that you concentrate on what you do, or how do you see it working, or how has it been working?
Yeah, well, Orchestra of St. Luke's is a very special animal. It's not a symphony orchestra in the traditional sense. It's self-governed. So I'm not music director, I'm principal conductor. Which means that I'm in charge only of a certain number of concerts during the year. Yes. Basically, I'm in charge of what I would call the hip portfolio.
Yeah.
And the most important moments during the year for the orchestra is our residency at Carnegie Hall. We have 3 concerts a year presented by Carnegie Hall on the main stage. And basically my job is to build that season, and clearly I was picked for that job because of what I do, and that is to perform 18th, early 19th century music in a hip fashion, in a historically informed practice approach. But it doesn't prevent me from doing other things. And actually, we started a very successful Bach festival in June, which is on a smaller scale. It happens in the smaller hall at Carnegie and Zankel Hall. And we have sometimes appearances in festivals and things like that. And we have projects for the future that are very, very interesting. What I like about this organization, among many, many things, is its incredible flexibility, and the fact that there's a lot of room to actually create new things. My job is to be the dreamer, and I work with a team of people who, when they feel that there's a way to make these dreams happen, they will find the way to do it. So I feel myself absolutely blessed to be working with the team led by Jim Rowe, the CEO there. And of course, for the musicians there, it's a very different experience because they have ownership. When I say it's self-governed, it means that there's a body of musicians, many veterans from the group that have been with the group in certain cases for really a very long time, and they are the owners of the institution. So I'm just there to serve the institution and help these musicians to carry the organization into new steps, new eras of its life. But it's about institution building. But of course, it's not something that I founded. It's just something that I inherit for a short period of time, which is basically what we conductors are doing.
Yes.
But there's a huge difference, as you know, between being a guest conductor who shows up for 5-6 days and has to basically do the very best that can be done in a very short period of time, and building a rapport over a very long period of time with an institution. And within that category, there's a huge difference between founding an institution, which I have done 2 times actually with the choir and the orchestra, as opposed to just inheriting the baton from someone and just passing it over to the next one. So these are just different levels of involvement, and by nature, I'm interested first and foremost in institution building. What I like is to plant roots, and I think it's probably related to the fact that my approach to music making, I would say, is very European, has been influenced by European conductors. The model I have for Les Violons, which I found in Quebec City, and the choir, these are very European models in terms of playing. but we are in North America, where you need to work a bit harder to plant deep roots.
It's very true. Yeah.
It also offers a lot more opportunities than one could get in the UK. I mean, starting a new group in the UK is a lot of work and is financially extremely difficult. When I started Les Violons de Roi in Quebec City, Quebec City is a capital city. It's the capital city of the province of Quebec, and there was no chamber orchestra in town.
Yeah.
So we got support from the government from the second year on. If I would like to start a new group now, I wouldn't get that.
No.
But back then, when I founded it in '84, there was room for that. So yes, it's much more work to be connected with the roots of this music in this part of the world. But the world is also wide open. You can create things, and that's what I've been doing all my life, like trying to build institutions.
I'm going to stick with your repertoire, and it's the 11th question, Bernard, which every conductor's had to answer. It's about score study, and should you be revisiting an old friend like the Brahms Requiem, as you said, is coming up, or maybe a Schubert symphony you've never conducted before? How do you go about marking your score, learning your score? First of all, I'm assuming, as you said, you wish you'd learned the piano as a child. You don't use the piano that often. You use your inner ear, but do you start big and go small? Do you start at the first page and go to the end? And are you a scribbler inner of things? I know I am. Everybody in the podcast knows I'm a red, blue, and black and write all sorts of historical notes, markings to myself, all sorts of things in my score. Or do you like to keep it, as many others conductors do, virginally clean and nothing in your score? How do you go about it?
I would say that the first time, like when I work on a new piece, I'm a scribbler, definitely. And I do it the very old-fashioned way, that I start from the bigger picture going into the details. So I start with analysis, and when I do that, I do write all of my analysis marks in the score, because for me, it's just my mind needs to understand the architecture and the structure of something, and in order to learn it in detail, and then from there on, I dig in. But when I buy a new score, or I change edition of a piece that I've learned before, then I won't be scribbling much. And actually, and I think most of my colleagues are like that the older you grow, the less you need, you feel the need to write a lot of stuff, because it has to be absorbed, it has to be in you. So, but that's very traditional. The only thing, and I will admit to that sin, is that I have, as part of my learning of a piece, I have absolutely no problem at some point listening and working with recordings.
Oh, I don't think it's a sin. I think many conductors have agreed with you.
Exactly.
Really,
it's not, because the problem with me is that because I'm not a keyboard player, I just cannot sit in front of the score and reduce it and play it by myself. So yes, inner ear, but inner ear is one thing. The sound of an orchestra is another one, and at some point, or a choir or soloist, whatever, at some point you need to hear the real thing. And I think I have developed over the years an extremely critical approach to listening to recordings of pieces that I prepare. One of my joys is to look for wrong notes, for things that are just not written in the score. So I permanently put what I hear against about the blueprint of the piece in my mind, just always trying to compare it. And I'll always listen to many different ones, so that I'm not stick to one thing. But I have no problem admitting to the fact that I do listen to recordings when I prepare music. Often what I will do is that if I'm learning a new piece, I will first listen to a couple of versions, and then I put the recordings aside, and then I start from the score. It just accelerates the process of creating again a blueprint of the piece in your mind. But it doesn't prevent you from the necessity of literally going into all of the details and making sure that you hear, I mean, in your head, what's written there.
Are you a young conductor, thirsty for knowledge and wanting to discover more about the world of conducting? Then my Patreon page is there for you. I'm constantly posting new content there based on my experiences as a conductor and an ex-orchestral player. And I offer you the chance to ask me any question any time of the day. You will gain access to interviews, video posts, tour diaries, articles and much, much more. If you pay for the whole year, then you will gain a 10% discount, and if you are a student, contact me directly and there will be a further discount. All of this can be found at patreon.com/a mic on the podium, and from just £5 a month, you gain access to this ever-growing resource on conductors and conducting. That's patreon.com. The details and links to the page are in the show notes attached to this episode. Now, the all-important 10 questions with my guest, Bernard Labadie. Bernard, it is time for the 10 questions. I wouldn't know what that would be. I know, I wouldn't know how to say that in French.
Les 10 questions.
And the first two are lumped into one, which is what sound or noise do you love and what sound or noise do you hate?
One of the sounds I love the most is the sound of bells. I live in a rather old part of Quebec City. I mean, old by North American standards. And there's a lovely little church just around the corner. And the sound of the bells, first of all, it's because not all churches have good sounding bells, but it's a perfect triad here. It sounds really, it's very beautiful, very clear, very pristine. And depending on where you are in the area, if you're walking, you don't hear the harmonics are different, of course. So it never sounds exactly the same. And across because I live by the river in Quebec City, and across the river, there's a church which was built at around the same time. And I am absolutely convinced, although I didn't do any research on it, that the bells from that church were built by the same company, the same bell makers, and that they were installed in that church probably around the same time, because it's the exact same triad. And
wow.
So there are days, especially Sundays, when if there's an 11 a.m. mass in both churches, but they're not their timeline is not absolutely lined up. So you will hear one church sounding the three bells, and then another one will respond, one way or the other. And it's not a religious thing or anything. It's just it's the sound that I find beautiful and uplifting, and also the fact that when I'm home, this is a sound that happens every day at fixed moments. So it's kind of a musical fixture in time that I find reassuring. For me, even when I'm on the road away from home, I hear bells and I think of home. I see myself at home, and my home is something very important because I live literally in my roots. I live just a few streets, away from where I was born, and the building next door was the old village school in the early 20th century, late 19th century, actually. I have a picture on my wall of my grandfather, who was in third grade, on the first row, and on the second row there's my grandmother, who was in fourth grade.
Oh wow.
And they are standing in front of the building, and you can absolutely recognize the building from the picture, and that's a picture from the class of 1898. So I really have the impression that I'm living where I'm supposed to live. Like, this is where I belong. So all of that sonic world, of bells, for me is related to that, actually.
And belonging to another world, the opposite, a sound that you hate.
Anything coming out of a loudspeaker in a mall or in an elevator.
Music.
The music. Nothing. There's nothing I hate more than that. That's why I try not to go to malls, especially at Christmas time, because I'm so fond of Christmas and of Christmas music. And for me, it's just murder.
Question 3 is, if you had 24 hours free, what would you spend it doing?
I would probably go to the nearest vineyard.
Oh, brilliant. Oh,
Because
that's wonderful.
I'm a wine lover.
Yeah.
Wine is a very important part of my life. I'm talking here about quality rather than quantity.
Mm.
Although on a few days, there's a few days when
Quality
life is
and
hard.
quantity can exist, coexist.
Exactly. But no, I've been fascinated with the wine, with the wine world since I was a teenager, because I was helping a neighbor across the street from my mom was making his own wine made from blueberries and all sorts of stuff. And the stuff was probably undrinkable. The thing is that I didn't drink it, but I was helping him. So the smell of yeast, of fermentation, the everything related to making wine and bottling it, it kind of triggered something when I was a teenager, although I was not drinking a lot. So that when I was in my early 20s, I started reading a lot about wine and starting buying. I started buying, collecting would be a big word, but buying good bottles. Actually, I remember as a student coming out of Laval University, I got a scholarship to study Gregorian chant in Paris. And it was the absolute perfect scholarship. It was 2 weeks a year, one in late November, early December, one in March, 2 weeks a year for 3 years in a row in Paris.
What a body blow that is. Yeah.
Exactly. And near the hotel where I was staying, there was a wine shop, and the man running it was the absolute quintessential wine man from a cellar in France. So big, round face, rosy cheeks, with a bearded collar around his head, and a huge leather apron. And for some reason, well, I would go there. There would be, on a Tuesday morning, there would be nobody in the store, so I would chat with him, and I think he fell in love with my Quebecer accent, and he felt that I was absolutely, with no pun intended, thirsty for learning about wine, and he would talk to me about all sorts of wines that he had. And the first bottles that I bought and treasured and drank back at home, almost like it would be mass, are bottles that I bought at that store. And so over the years, I got the opportunity to start a collection. And as a conductor, I've been traveling a lot in towns or areas of the world where wine is made. So for instance, for years, I was a guest at San Francisco Symphony, many years in a row. And San Francisco Symphony has this very weird schedule where you have a first rehearsal on a Saturday morning, and then you're off until Tuesday or sometimes Wednesday morning. Because the 2 weeks overlap. They start a first week on the Saturday morning, and on the Saturday evening, on the same day, the previous week ends.
Yeah, the previous week's concert. Yeah,
exactly. So in anywhere in the world, that would be a bummer. But in San Francisco, it just gave me time to rent a car and drive up to go to wine country and explore. So, and of course, in Europe, in France, in Germany, almost everywhere I go, I try to arrange things. I remember when I was offered my first, and actually only gig in New Zealand, and I was offered the job. And normally when I'm offered a job, I'm very mindful of what is the program, how many rehearsals, do they know what I do for a living? In terms of, they know that the hip guy is coming in town. So are they usually they are, but sometimes they're not. So usually I ask all of those questions, and I'm very careful before saying yes to a gig. And when I got an offer with the Auckland Philharmonia, I didn't ask any questions. I said, yes, I'm going. Because one of my favorite wineries in the world is Kumeu River, and it's about 25 minutes drive from Auckland downtown. And as fate happens, as fate would have it, one of the people working in the office, the orchestra, new people in the. So I got a driver to go there, and I spent like 3 hours. I think I drank, I tasted absolutely everything they produced. Fabulous memories. Concert was okay, but the wine visit was the main purpose. So, and for me, it's not just about the hedonistic
no
part of it. Also, for me, drinking wine is like traveling in a glass, because I'm always interested. Where does the wine come from? Who are the people who make it? How do they make it? Is it connected to traditions? Is that innovation? Is it wine? If you're interested in wine, it tells you so much about humanity. That for me, it's a way of traveling without having necessarily to travel, and it does taste good usually too.
Question 4 is, who would be your favorite conductor or conductors of yesteryear?
Charles Mackerras.
Yes, brilliant choice.
Because of the inquisitive mind in everything he was doing. One of the first hip conductors who was doing a lot of other stuff, but I think basically he did a lot for Czech music. That is well known, but he also did a lot really for 18th century repertoire and 19th century, including romantic music, which he was one of the first to clean up and to make relevant, as far as I'm concerned. So I've always been an admirer. I never had the pleasure of meeting him. Apparently, everybody who's met him has been struck in some ways.
I met him. I met him on a couple of occasions.
Quite of character, but have a great admiration and respect for how he approached music making.
Well, one wonders whether Janacek, or as he would say, Janacek, would be anything like as famous today as he is now if it wasn't for Mackerras's work on his music and championing it. And the other thing is, I think the last time I played for him, because I'm not sure you know, but I played in the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra for 22 years before I
didn't know that.
Before I joined or went to the dark side.
Exactly.
I think the last time I played for him, we did Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, and he insisted that the bass line was doubled throughout on a contrabassoon, because he discovered that in the world premiere, or one of the early performances that Beethoven conducted, that there was a contrabassoon there. I have to say, I found it very, very, very interesting. But yeah, you're right. He was always inquisitive. Always, I enjoyed playing for him very much.
And he was. What I like about these people, and we're about to talk about John Gardner again. What I like about these people is that they take risks.
Yes,
and sometimes the risk don't pay off. But they do not have a safe approach to music making while having to perform at a very, very high level, which is, so that's a risky life. And I have the utmost respect for people who are willing to do that.
I am assuming, therefore, that your answer to question 5 is John Eliot Gardner, or Sir John Eliot Gardner. The reasons you gave, but also there's that personal connection, of course.
Yeah, exactly. Personal connection, and I mean, I'm still interested in everything he does. I'm not saying that I like everything, that I love everything. That's impossible. But again, he brings. I mean, he's a maverick. He's always trying stuff. I remember hearing live his cycle of Schumann symphonies on period instruments at Lincoln Center, and it was a revelation. I'm not saying that that's my favorite version or anything, but for once, that answered the question about Schumann symphonies and their orchestration, which has for years been considered awkward and silly and not effective. And you realize that when you hear it on period instruments, 90% of these problems disappear. And there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn in that. So when you do that music as a modern conductor with modern instruments, then it feeds you. It feeds your approach. It gives you keys to how to resolve these problems.
What is the hardest work you've ever conducted?
Because of the repertoire that I do, there are no huge technical challenges. I do mostly 18th and 19th century. So I never have to memorize, 2, 4, 3, 8, 7, 8, 5, 8, 3, 8, 2, 8, 4, 8. That never happens to me. So it's not technically, I would say it's emotionally.
Yeah.
And it's definitely St. Matthew Passion, which is the absolute peak in Western repertoire. And it's a piece that I've adored, revered, studied so many times. I mean, I spent so much time with the score and listening to recording when I was a teenager. And it's not a piece that I get to conduct enough, simply because it's not done often, obviously, because it requires 3 choirs and 2 orchestras and usually a minimum of 6 soloists. And every time I do it, it's a journey that I find absolutely, it's nourishing, it's fulfilling, but I always come out completely drained.
Yeah.
Emotionally, when we get to that final chorus, it kills me every time. I just find it difficult because this is music that resonates so much with me. And there are pieces that are very much associated with me. I've done Messiah, I think, like 200 times. And I do it from memory, but it's not the same kind of relationship. St. Matthew is something sacred in my mind, and every time I enter that temple, I am in awe. And it's emotionally much more demanding to deal with something that you respect at the highest level, because you always have the feeling that you might not be up to the task. Every time I do that piece, I ask myself a question: will I and will we be up to the task of bringing that, of giving that masterpiece the tender and loving care and dedication that it deserves?
When traveling abroad to conduct, what item could you not leave home without?
It's going to be a very down-to-earth answer. It's headphones.
Noise cancelling, I would imagine.
Noise cancelling headphones, but also good enough so that you can listen to music when you're on the train, when you're waiting in the airport, when you're I have them on permanently. And very often on planes, I'm not playing anything. I'm just canceling the noise from the engine. Nothing romantic about that answer. I'm sorry. It's a very down-to-earth one.
Sometimes we need to be down to earth. We can't all be
absolutely.
romantic all the time.
It's part of our lives.
It is. Number 8 is, what is the one thing you would change about being a conductor?
I would like to work a lot more with period instruments, actual period instruments. When I founded my orchestra, Le Violon de Roi, in Quebec City in 1984, my models were, the back then rather young English concert and groups like that. And I wanted to build something similar to that, but there were simply not enough people in Quebec City playing period instruments, and the level of people were, that was back in the days, especially in America, when most people were playing the Baroque flute or the Baroque oboe or the Baroque violin, turned to that because they couldn't make a decent living on the modern instrument. So
that's fair.
Yeah, absolutely. So the level was not interesting, and I was interested in a very, very high level. So when we started Le Violon, the idea was to gather young musicians. Most of them were just graduates from the conservatory or the university, or were actually sometimes still even in school, and to hire young musicians who are still very, very flexible. And then I was about to say, we can teach them style, but actually we learn style together, literally. Because at age 21, when I founded Le Violon, in my head, I knew what I wanted the music to sound like, but I had no idea how to make it happen. And especially on modern instruments, which are not perfectly suited to what I had in mind, because I had been fed by all these recordings using period instruments. So that led us and me, of course, at the same time, to gain expertise on how to make 18th century music, 19th century music on modern instruments, how to perform it, and being really informed as the eye and hip.
Yes.
Really
Yeah.
informed about performance practice, because I mean, I believe that in an ideal world, the period instrument is the best exponent for any music, because composers were writing for instruments. There's nothing I hate more than people saying, "Oh, if Mozart has known the modern piano, he would have used it." Of course, he would have, but would the music have been the same?
No,
I don't
well,
think so.
no, of course
I
it
don't
wouldn't.
think.
No.
No, exactly. So there's an organic connection between the instrument and the music which cannot be ignored. And for me, the Baroque violin is not an inferior version of the modern violin.
No,
The
it's just
Baroque
different.
oboe,
Yeah.
exactly. The Baroque oboe is not an inferior instrument. It's a different instrument, and there are things that you can do on a period instrument which you cannot do on the modern instruments. Think of the French, the typical French Baroque ornament called flattement, where on a wooden instrument it's imagine that you're trilling, so yeah, that you're just using your finger to block one hole, but you don't block it completely. So you just lower the tone. It's like it's like the lower half of a vibrato that you create with your fingers. Try that on a modern flute.
Yeah. It ain't happening. Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, it ain't happening at all. So anyways, back to your question. My goal was to eventually bring Les Violons to be an orchestra performing on period instruments. So we tried kind of a transition. We started with the bows.
Yeah.
We convincing our people to try to use period bows on their modern instruments. And it was so successful that we got stuck there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is such a massive difference. As a ex-violinist who taught the violin for 10 years at the Conservatoire in Birmingham, I always used to try and make my students play at some point early on to play a Bach solo partitura or sonata with a Baroque bow on their modern instrument, because it meant that there were certain techniques they'd been taught before they came to me that are actually physically impossible to do with a Baroque bow.
Exactly.
And there are certain articulations you have to produce, and then then you can try it with a modern bow and say, well, now try and replicate what you've just done. Of course, the easiest thing would be to say, give them a Baroque violin and a Baroque bow and say, go on, learn it on that. But we don't all have that sort of money or those sort of resources. But it's the biggest thing. I mean, really, it is.
I would say that 75% of what I would call the period sound on a string instrument comes from the bow.
Yeah.
How you use it. And I mean, for those young violinists, all the ones who had that, to discover that, no, the tip is not as strong as the frog, and it will never happen. Don't try to make it sound even the way you learn on the modern bow, because that's not how it works. So, but we never passed that stage, because when we started that, we actually did something that very few people were doing back then. We were performing Baroque music on modern instruments using period bows. And in the 80s, that was extremely rare. And actually, starting because the orchestra became permanent in 92, we were the only permanent orchestra in the world doing that. And in the early years when we were doing it, we were, frowned upon and looked down by both the Baroque people who said you're bastards because you're not going the whole 9 yards. You're just doing part of it. And the modern people would look at it the same way, like, why do you do that? It's just. And the irony is that what was considered like a compromise or, bastard approach to making this music has become very, very trendy with time, because the border and the line between, hip performance and traditional performance, that line has been blurred big time.
Yeah,
I mean, massively. The day that Simon Rattle programmed Rameau's Les Boréades with the Berlin fell, there was a huge brick wall that fell down on that day. And now all musicians, all conductors are interested in that, and they know that they have to know something about it.
Yes, very true.
So because of that, because we became very successful, we never went through the whole transition. So Les Violons I see the experience of Livionneau as something absolutely seminal, but also typical of the milieu in which this experience was led. That is the northern part of North America, and we toured a lot in the States, and quite frankly, when you're touring the American Midwest in January, and on one night you're performing in a neo-Gothic church with 70% humidity, and the following day you were in a high school auditorium with 25% humidity, you're very happy not to have gut strings.
Absolutely. Yeah. The minute you started talking about humidity, I thought gut strings. Also,
exactly.
Calf head timps and things like that.
Exactly,
and,
exactly.
That's the last thing you want. Yeah, absolutely.
So Livionneau is a North American animal that was built for because Quebec City is a small market. The orchestra cannot. It's a 34-week contract for the orchestra, which is amazing. But I mean, at least a third and ideally half of these weeks should happen outside of Quebec City. So, anyways, all of this to say that because of that, I never got to really work a lot with period instruments, and because my career blossomed mostly in North America before I started being known in Europe and the UK, that I get only rare opportunities to work with period instruments, and I cherish every one of them. I especially cherish my very irregular but still happening relationship with the English concert. Like 3 years ago, I did Glux Orfeo there at the Edinburgh Festival with the English concert. Last summer, I was supposed to do my first Handel's Saul with them, and I had to cancel it because of a health situation, which has been an important part of my story in my life. And since 2014, I was in 2014. I would say at the height of a certain kind of life. I was traveling a lot. I was, and in late April, May of 2014, I was, I had a week with Livionneau, followed with a week with Chicago Symphony, followed with a recording with the SVR in Freiburg, followed by a week with Swedish radio in Stockholm, followed by a week with the Philharmonique de Radio France in Paris. That was my life back then.
Yeah,
and I was enjoying it. I was, I was the king of the world.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kate Winslet. And and smack in the middle of it, I was diagnosed with cancer.
Oh
God! I was in Freiburg, and a really nasty one, which upended my life for 2 years. And actually, it was such an aggressive cancer. It was a T-cell lymphoma with aggravated hemophagocytosis syndrome. That you can look it up in
I'll Google it.
Yeah. It's that was a very bad combo, and quite frankly, I was not supposed to survive, and the odds were very, very low, and I got the right lottery ticket. So I was hospitalized for a month in Germany because I was diagnosed in Freiburg, then traveled back to Canada, then was treated, spent 6 months in the hospital. I was in a coma for a month. After the coma, I had to relearn how to walk, how to sit by the bed, how to go to the bathroom.
Wow.
A major, major shock, which has changed my life in a dramatic way. And with a lot of bad sides, of course, but also good sides. Because when you go through such a transformational process, if you have to go down that dark hole where that you might you're on a table, you're on the operation room, that they're about to make you I'm sorry, my English is bad today.
It's fine.
I was about to put you to sleep, but that's in English, so I'm
anesthesia.
Anesthesia. Yeah, exactly. And that you might not wake up, literally. You're aware of that. So, and I had lots of close calls and close encounters with death over that long period of time. So if you have to go down that dark well, if you get the privilege to come out of it, there are things that you can bring back from that very dark well. And for me, it's been, of course, a certain urgency, a feeling of urgency, the fact that time is slipping through your fingers all the time, but also a weird kind of freedom. The fact that I was 51, I was ready to go when it happened. I mean, ready to go, meaning that if I had gone at age 51, people could have said he lived a full life. Because it found an orchestra, a choir. We have a brilliant concert hall that belongs to Quebec City, through the town, but it's been rebuilt for us, been redone for us. So I could have said, I had a full life, and I was ready to go, because obviously I thought I would go. And then in November of 2014, I knocked at St. Peter's doors, and the office was closed for renovation, and I had to come back. And so when you get to do that, I mean, basically, I have the feeling that I'm living on a gigantic credit card.
But it's a free hit. You're
exactly,
on a free hit.
And I never get the account of the mail. They lost my address. And when people ask me, how old are you? I say, I just turned 8, because I got a complete reboot because of the cancer I had. I had a stem cell transplant. The stem cells came from my sister. She saved my life. I changed blood type, just to tell you what kind of transformation this is.
Wow.
So complete total reboot. So after that, it's a rebirth. It's like I was born on October 22nd, 2014. That's my new I'll turn 60 next year, and people tell me, oh, what does it mean to turn 60? I don't give a damn, because it's not, the timeline is different. And my body came out of that experience half broken. I had to work very hard to rebuild it. I never managed to rebuild it the way it was before. There are simple things in life, like kneeling is incredibly difficult, because I lost the core muscles that allow me to do it, and they cannot be rebuilt. And I keep living. I mean, cancer, the cancer I had is a gift that never stops giving. So like this year, the gift from actually 2 years ago, which is still ongoing, is that I need hip replacements, both hips, because I took so much cortisone that my bones are literally disintegrating, the ones around the hip. So because of that, I had to cancel 6 months of work. When I had cancer, I canceled 2 years, or actually 2 years and a half of work, plus the pandemic. I mean, just together.
It's compounding.
It's been a very rough path since 2014, but it also makes everything that I do more precious. I know it might be the last one, because I was not expecting that hit when I hit the wall, and so I know it exists. Death might come back at any time, and when it comes, I will recognize it, because I looked it in the eyes. And
it's an amazing story and an inspirational story. And I think your attitude is so right. It's a story I will definitely be making sure that my eldest daughter listens to, because that's something she's very much interested in, having got a master's in a very similar topic to do with stem cells and oncology. So I will be making sure she listens to you. But yeah, I didn't see that coming, because as the listeners know, I'm looking at you on Zoom, and you look a picture of health, and smart.
Thank you. That's because you see
Finally,
only
chatty
the upper
person.
I see only the upper part. No, but seriously, my body is. I'll turn 60 next year. My body is at least 75, and so I don't expect to live. My mother died 2 years ago at age 100. But I really don't expect to follow in her footsteps, because of what happened to me, and it's fine. I'm okay with that.
Enjoy your free hit whilst
exactly. And then you stop looking at things like everything is a stepping stone to something else, to something bigger, to bigger success. You stop looking at life like this. You just appreciate every step in your life, everything that happens. I mean, I remember when I came home after being hospitalized for 6 months, I was just amazed of how good the orange juice was in the morning, because the one they serve you in hospital is, it tastes like shit.
Yeah.
So I mean, things like that, and I mean, for the long period of time when I was, rebuilding my strength, I live in this magical place with almost 180-degree view on the St. Lawrence River, and it's been feeding me, it's been keeping me alive during all that time. And every project that I knew now for me is special, because it hopefully it won't be the last one, but it could be the last one.
It could be. Yeah.
You have to be ready for that all the time. And when you've lived through that, there's so many things that were annoying you, including elevator music earlier in your life, that then suddenly don't matter. It's just like not. And I have about 50 or 60% of the physical energy that I had before cancer, so I have to use it wisely. And I cannot hop from one job to the other the way I used to. Sometimes I'm doing it, but I need big chunks of resting time after that.
I'm going to move on to question number 9. And I've got
you got a long answer to number 8. Eh?
Yeah, I did get a long answer to number 8, but I'm going to link in the answer to number 8 and the answer to number 3 as being 2 possible areas that you may have been interested in pursuing as a profession instead of being a conductor. If
you've got your answer.
Oh, so what was it? What would it have been? Would it have been a maker of wine or specializing in oncology?
Definitely not oncology, but wine related, definitely. I don't know what it could have been, because I'm a wine lover, but I'm definitely not an expert taster. I would describe myself as an enlightened amateur. So what would have been my place, I just don't know, but it would most likely have been something related to that, because it's my second passion in life, literally. And on some days it's the first.
So questions 3 and 9 both included wine, and I know that you enjoy wine now very much. So I'm looking forward to knowing what your choice of final meal and especially the drink might be. If the world were to end tonight, of course, I must bring that in, just in case you wanted to go all religious on me. But I don't think you were going to.
No, I'm not going to. It's definitely not just regular wine and bread.
No,
it's more than that. But it wouldn't be a Michelin star. I mean, I've enjoyed a few, but I'm not someone who just goes to one Michelin star restaurant to another. I like simple food. I like Italian food because people say that if you have more than 3 ingredients, you have too many ingredients in Italian. So it's hard for me to pinpoint an exact meal, but it would be something like a really nice ossobuco with risotto and a glass of an exceptional Chianti, or a great wine from Tuscany. But it's so, I mean, now when I open that part of my mind, maybe not a Chianti, maybe I would want a great wine from the northern Rhone Valley, even though it's not supposed to go with ossobuco. So it's but something simple. Simple, and not that it doesn't taste great, but that it doesn't need food, does not need to be rethought all the time. Sometimes just the natural taste of things, a couple of them that you put together magically. Sometimes this is the best result. And actually, I think that the best wines are made in the same way. When you take care of the land, you treat it with respect, and then you leave it to give you the right ingredients, and you make the wine happen as simply as possible. So you don't need to fuss around with it too much. You just make it simply. And for me, that's the key to the very last meal, which I hope I will have as late as possible.
Well, the listeners will know I do love a cheesy link, and you mentioned the right ingredients. And I think when we get 2 people who both conduct, who enjoy food and drink, to get chatting, they're the right ingredients. And I think I've had a wonderful hour or so, nearly 2 hours chatting with you, Bernard. And I hope in the future our paths can cross and you can teach me a little bit more about wine and we can sit down and carry on chatting. Thank you very much.
It's been a privilege talking to you, Michael. Take care. Bye-bye.
A Mic on the Podium was devised and produced by Michael Seal, with music by Ben Dawson. Next time, I chat with a Dutch conductor who went through the famous German Kapellmeister system, working at 3 different opera houses, including 10 years as general music director in Koblenz. Since 2018, he's been the principal guest conductor of the WDR Funkhaus Orchestra in Cologne. But until then, bye-bye.